There's no consensus on when or where Ted began killing women. He told different stories to different people, and he refused to divulge specifics of his earliest crimes, even as he confessed in graphic detail to dozens of later murders in the days preceding his execution. He told Nelson that he attempted his first kidnapping in 1969 in Ocean City, New Jersey, but didn't kill anyone till sometime in 1971 in Seattle. He told psychologist Art Norman that he killed 2 women in Atlantic City in 1969 while he visited family in Philadelphia. He hinted but refused to elaborate to homicide detective Robert D. Keppel that he committed a murder in Seattle in 1972 and another murder in 1973 that involved a hitchhiker near Turnwater. Anne Rule and Robert Keppel both believe that he might have started killing as a teenager, and we will talk about that a little bit later. I made this print really tiny and my contacts are not cooperating. Okay, much better. So, Ted's earliest documented homicides were committed in 1974 when he was 27 years old. I almost said just 27 years old, but by 27, it's reasonable. By his own admission, Ted had mastered the necessary skills in the era before DNA profiling to leave minimal incriminating forensic evidence at the crime scene. So, this is kind of the stuff that I want to talk about in part 4 after his execution, but I'm not sure if I'm going to do that video. If you want to see that, put, a comment in below that you want to see a part 4, because I feel like this is going to be really long. Anyway, okay. So, shortly after midnight, January 4th, 1974, right around the time that he terminated his relationship with Stephanie Brooks, Ted Bundy entered the basement apartment of Joni Lentz. She also has several pseudonyms, but Joni, age 18. Joni had gone to sleep in her basement room of a big house in which several young people rented together. The next afternoon, after she had not appeared all morning, her housemates went to check on her. Here's your graphic warning, guys. You know I'm reading about Ted Bundy, and you know that he killed people in terrible, horrible, horrible ways. And I'm going to tell you about it in the least graphic way possible, but I'm not going to skimp on the details. If you don't like that, I apologize. Check out my next missing persons video, or skip forward a little. Actually, don't, because this whole video is going to be like that. Anyway, so they went to check on her, and they found her lying on her bed. Her hair and face were matted with dried blood. She had been beaten with a metal rod that was broken from her bed frame. When they pulled the covers back, they were horrified to find out that the rod had been jammed into her vaginal area. The incredible thing about this is, this poor girl lived through this attack. It left irreparable damage to her internal organs, and she never regained memory of the attack. It also left her severely brain damaged. She was shy, but a friendly girl with no enemies, and it was determined at first to be a random attack of savage violence. No, it was just Ted Bundy. His next known attack was less than a month later, on January 31st. He attacked Linda Ann Healy, who was 21 years old. She was a tall, slender, beautiful girl with long dark hair and blue eyes. She was a ski forecaster for the Northwest Ski Reports. She was a senior at WSU, majoring in psychology. She'd grown up in a sheltered, middle-upper-class home near Seattle. She sang beautifully, but her real love was working with mentally handicapped children. She lived in a house with 4 other female college students, and they had all heard of the attack on Joni Lentz and were normally very cautious. showed up for the dinner that she never made, and they knew then how serious it was. They called the police, and upon investigation, the police pulled back her bed covers and found a heavily blood-stained pillowcase and blood-soaked sheets. Her nightgown was found stuffed in her closet, the neckline crusted with dried blood. The clothes that she had worn that day were missing. A single hair would be found at the crime scene, which did not belong to Linda. A year would pass before they found her decapitated and dismembered body. During a thorough investigation of what later became known as Bundy's graveyard, Linda's skull was found bearing unmistakable marks of a vicious battering. Ted confessed that he broke into the basement room, beat her unconscious, dressed her in blue jeans, a white blouse, and boots, and carried her away. That's just creepy that he then made the bed after. Whatever, he's a sicko. Okay. During the first half of 1974, female college students disappeared at a rate of about one per month. On March 12th, Donna Gail Manson, a 19-year-old student at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, 60 miles southwest of Seattle, left her dormitory to attend a jazz concert on campus but never arrived. Donna was a very intelligent college student, an expert flutist with the potential to play in a symphony, and highly individual. She was 5 foot and 100 pounds with long dark hair and very pretty. In spite of her high IQ, she had grade problems and smoked marijuana daily. She was given to taking off unexpectedly, returning to her friends with adventurous tales of hitchhiking to other towns. Her roommate was bothered by her obsession with magic, death, and alchemy. She often stayed out late and asked her roommate to cover for her in class while she slept in. So, in March of 74, she wasn't reported missing for 6 days because of her habit of taking off on a whim. Sad. On April 17th, Susan Elaine Raincourt, age 19, disappeared while on her way to her dorm room after an evening advisors meeting at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg, 110 miles east-southeast of Seattle. Susan differed from the other girls. She was a pretty blonde with a curvy figure and large blue eyes. She was 5'2" and 120 pounds. She was one of 6 children, and she worked 2 full-time jobs 7 days a week this summer before her freshman year in order to pay her tuition. She was an extremely shy but brilliant girl with ambitions to go into medicine. 6th, Roberta Kathleen Parks left her dormitory at Oregon State University, 85 miles south of Portland, to have coffee with friends at Memorial Union, but never arrived. Kathy was a tall, slender girl with long, ash blonde hair. She was majoring in world religions. She had had a miserable week. She was homesick for her family, and she had broken up with her boyfriend. On May 4th, she had had an argument with her father on the phone, and her sister called on the 6th to say that her father suffered a massive heart attack. But her sister later called with good news that the father would recover. It's speculated that Kathy was feeling terrible guilt over the argument and heart attack, and that night she agreed to walk to another dorm hall to have coffee with friends. She never arrived, and her skull was excavated with the others on Taylor Mountain. Detectives from King County and Seattle police departments grew increasingly concerned. There was no significant physical evidence, and the missing women had little in common apart from being young, attractive, and white with long hair parted in the middle. On June 1st, Brenda Carol Paul, age 22, disappeared after leaving the Flame Tavern in Buren. She was last seen in the parking lot talking to a brown-haired man with his arm in a sling. She was 5'3", 112 pounds, with brown eyes. She'd gone to the tavern alone and told friends that she would see about getting a ride to Sun Lakes to meet them there later. She stayed at the tavern until 2 a.m., asked a musician for a ride, but he was going the other way. Because of her free spirit, her friends thought nothing of her absence and did not become suspicious until almost 19 days after she was last seen. On June 11th, UW student Georgianne Hawkins vanished while walking down a brightly lit alleyway between her boyfriend's dorm and her sorority house. She was a tiny, beautiful girl at 5'2" and 115 pounds, long dark hair and large brown eyes. Exceptionally bright, she maintained straight A's through the tough UW curriculum, though many students dropped to a C average. She had been having trouble with Spanish and considered dropping the course. The day of June 10th, she called her mother and told her that she was going to cram for the following day's Spanish final instead of dropping it. Georgianne had a Pierce County job lined up for the summer, and she talked to her parents about it every week. She belonged to Kappa Alpha Theta sorority, and on June 10th, she and another sorority sister had gone to a party and had a couple drinks. Georgianne then left to stop by her boyfriend's room and say goodnight to him on her way back to her own dorm, which was just 6 houses down. She went to cram for her exam. She was a very cautious girl and rarely walked anywhere alone, but the street was very well lit and not deserted. Many students were cramming for exams that night, so she was hardly the only one awake at 12:30. She visited her boyfriend, borrowed some notes, and headed up the street. A friend called out the window to her, and they chatted a few minutes. She said goodnight and walked 30 feet away before the friend stuck his head back into the window. 2 other male friends remembered seeing her cover the last 20 feet before disappearing around the corner. She only had 40 feet left to go in the brightly lit alleyway. Her roommate knew something was wrong when she didn't arrive 2 hours later, and she called the boyfriend and learned that she'd left the place at 1 a.m. She woke the house mother, and together they waited for Georgianne. They called the police in the morning, and because of the other disappearances in the area, the Seattle police took action immediately. They later learned that the house mother had awakened to a scream. She had thought that it was a few of the students horsing around as usual and went back to sleep. Ted confessed to her murder before his execution, and although he was foggy on the details, he remembered how trusting she was. He'd asked for her help carrying his briefcase to his car because of his fake cast, and she'd obliged. He knocked her out, stuffed her into the car, and sped away. She came to before he killed her, and in her confused rambling, said that she thought he'd been sent to help her with the Spanish exam. He knocked her out again, pulled over, and strangled her. witnesses came forward to report seeing a man that night in the alley, on crutches with a leg cast, struggling to carry a briefcase. One woman recalled that he had asked her to help him carry the case to his car, a light brown Volkswagen Beetle. During this period of time, Ted was working in Olympia at the Department of Emergency Services, a state government agency involved in the search for missing women. How ironic is this? He is murdering them and then pretending to look for them. There, he would meet and date a woman named Carol Ann Boone, a twice-divorced mother of two, who 6 years later would play an important role in Ted Bundy's life, so remember her name. We're going to talk about her in part 3. Reports of the 6 missing women and Sparks's brutal beating, or Joan Ann Lynn's Sparks, must not have changed that in my notes, appeared prominently in newspapers and on TV throughout Washington and Oregon. Fear spread among the population, and hitchhiking by young women dropped sharply. Pressure mounted on law enforcement, but the lack of physical evidence sincerely hampered them. Police could not provide reporters with the little information that was available for fear of compromising the investigation. Further similarities between the victims were noted. The disappearances all took place at night, usually near ongoing construction, within a week of midterm or final exams. All of the victims were wearing slacks or blue jeans, and at most of the crime scenes, there were sightings of a man with a cast or sling with a brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle. The Pacific Northwest murders culminated on July 14th in broad daylight, with the abductions of 2 women at a crowded beach on Lake, I know I'm going to mess this up, Sammamish State Park, a suburb 20 miles east of Seattle. 5 female witnesses describe an attractive young man wearing a white tennis outfit with his left arm in a sling, speaking with a light accent, perhaps Canadian or British, who introduced himself as Ted. He asked for their help in unloading a sailboat from his tan or brown Volkswagen Beetle. 4 of them refused, and 1 accompanied him as far as his car until she saw that there was no sailboat and ran like a smart girl. 3 additional witnesses saw him approach Janice Ann Ott. She stood barely 5 feet and 100 pounds, so I don't know how she's going to help him unload any sort of sailboat, but whatever. She was a very young-looking 23, with long blonde hair and gray-green eyes. She was a probation caseworker for King County Youth Services in Seattle, and she was very educated in the psychology of the antisocial personality. But not that educated, because she fell prey to Ted Bundy. She felt that her experience and kind personality, she could really help others who needed special guidance in changing for the better. Yeah. A newlywed of a year and a half, July 14th was a sad day for her. The job she'd worked so hard for had taken her away to Washington, leaving her husband behind in his own practice in Riverside, California. She was missing him very much that day. She'd left a note for her roommate and said she'd be home by 4, and then biked to the park. Witnesses later said she got up to help a friendly man in a cast, and that was the last time she was seen alive. Workers discovered some of her remains in a wooded area where the other victims had been dumped. About 4 hours later, after Janice Ott went missing, Denise Marie Naslund, age 19, went missing. She was a strikingly pretty girl, 5 feet 4 and 120 pounds, long dark hair and dark eyes, studying to be a computer programmer, working part-time to pay her way through night school. She and her boyfriend of 9 months planned a picnic that day in the park with another couple. They roasted hot dogs, and then the men fell asleep in the sun. Denise walked off to the bathroom around 4:30 and never came back. Her friends started to worry and search for her. Denise had brought her dog, and they hoped that she was looking for the dog, but it turned up alone. Her remains were discovered in a wooded area was nothing that the bungling law enforcement officials could do to stop him. Kind of ballsy, I think, to just give them your actual name. Maybe he thought he would just kill them all and no one would notice, but he'd murdered approximately 10 victims in Oregon, Utah, and Washington. He had a remarkable advantage, as his facial features were charming, yet not especially memorable. He would later be described as a chameleon, able to look totally different by just changing his hairstyle, for example. Which I don't see, but okay. I never met the guy, so. The King County Police were finally provided with a detailed description of the suspect and his car. A composite sketch was printed in regional newspapers, and Meg, Ann Rule, a DES employee and a UW psychology professor, all recognized the profile, the sketch, and the car, and reported Ted as a possible suspect. But detectives, who were receiving up to 200 tips a day, thought it very unlikely that a clean-cut law student with no adult criminal record could be the perpetrator. Joke's on you, huh? 4 people, and you're just gonna ignore them, whatever. In August of 1974, we're still in 1974 and he's killed this many people, Ted received a second acceptance from the University of Utah Law School and moved to Salt Lake, leaving Meg in Seattle, which we talked about already. He called her often, and he dated at least a dozen other women. When he studied first-year law curriculum a second time, he was devastated to find out that other students had something that he did not. He found the classes completely incomprehensible and said that it was a great disappointment to him. Well, you're a great disappointment to society, bro, but whatever. A new string of homicides began the following month, including 2 that would remain undiscovered until Ted confessed them shortly before his execution. September 2nd, he raped and strangled a still unidentified hitchhiker in Idaho, and either disposed of the remains immediately in a nearby river, or returned the next day to photograph and dismember the corpse. Not really sure. October 2nd, he seized a 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox in Holiday, a suburb of Salt Lake City, drug her into a wooded area, intending to de-escalate his pathological urges, he claimed, by sexually assaulting her and then releasing her. But he accidentally strangled her in the process of trying to silence her screams. No, you didn't. Her remains were buried near Capitol Reef National Park, but were never found. On October 18th, Melissa Ann Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of police chief of Midvale, another Salt Lake City suburb, disappeared after leaving a pizza parlor. She was a very cautious girl, and Midvale itself was a small Mormon town, very quiet. And though her father worried about his kids, he taught them to be self-aware. Melissa had very little fear in the tiny community. She was 5'3", small, pretty girl with long dark hair parted in the middle. She had plans to attend a slumber party, and ended up walking to the local pizza parlor to console a friend who'd had a fight with her boyfriend. After this, she left to pick up her clothes and go to the party, but never made it home or to the party. She was found battered and nude 9 days later, far from the small town she'd grown up in. She had been severely beaten, perhaps with a crowbar, and her body had been battered as well. Her head had been severely beaten, perhaps with a crowbar, is what I'm trying to say, and her body had been battered as well. She was strangled and sexually assaulted. On Halloween, Laura Ann Amy, also 17, disappeared. She stood nearly 6 feet tall and weighed a mere 115 pounds. Felt very insecure of her awkward pony appearance. I can't type and apparently read my own freaking notes. She dropped out of high school and moved in with friends while working small jobs. She was referred to as a drifter, looking for something to grasp in life. Talked to her parents daily, but wasn't noticed missing for 4 days. She'd gone to a cafe on Halloween and, bored with the activity, left around midnight and went to a park. with had been sexually assaulted. She had been drinking, but not so much that she couldn't scream or run or fight back. It was a rainy day when 18-year-old Carol DeRange left home around 6:30 p.m. and headed towards a shopping mall. Murray Shopping Mall. She was a very striking girl with large doe eyes and long dark hair. She was living at home and working for a telephone company. While she was at the mall, she ran into some cousins and visited them for a while. And she made a purchase and headed off to the bookstore, which is where I usually am. And as she was looking through books, a handsome, well-dressed man approached her. He asked her if she'd parked near Sears, and she said yes. He asked for her license number, and she gave it to him. He then told her that someone had tried to break into her car, and she needed to come take a look. Young and trusting, Carol didn't even wonder how he'd found her. He'd had an authoritative air that made her assume he was a security guard or police officer. No. She followed him quietly out of the building, but felt sudden apprehension as they headed out into the rainy night. She asked him for ID, and he laughed at her, making her feel stupid for bothering. They got to her car, and nothing was missing, and then he told her she needed to come to the station to see if she knew the suspect. After much hesitation, she followed him to the side building, which he told her was a substation. He then coerced her into going to headquarters. It wasn't until they were in his Volkswagen that she smelled alcohol on his breath. When he told her to put on her seatbelt, she said no and was ready to jump out of the car, but he had already driven off and was going very fast. When she realized that he was heading away from the police station, suddenly he screeched to a halt and tried to handcuff her. But in the struggle, he connected both cuffs on the same wrist. As they struggled, he pulled out a small gun and threatened her with it. She fell out of the car door and onto the ground and got up as he came at her with a crowbar. He threw her against the car, and in a sheer adrenaline rush, she broke free from her attacker and ran wildly into the road. An older couple came upon her just in time and took her to the police station. Here was their first living, breathing victim. She had managed to escape and provided the police with a description of the man, the car, and a sample of his blood that got on her jacket during the struggle. Unsatiated. Later that evening, Deborah Jean Kent, a 17-year-old student at Viewmont High School, went missing. Debbie was pretty, long brown hair parted in the middle. Her father was recovering from a heart attack, and on the night of November 8th, he was feeling well enough to attend a high school play with Debbie and her mother. They dropped her younger brother off at a local skating rink and went to the high school. Debbie called the skating rink at intermission to let her brother know the play wouldn't end until well after 10 and then returned to her seat. She offered to pick up her brother while her parents stayed behind at the school and hurried away to the parking lot around 10:30 p.m. Several people who lived near the school later admitted to hearing two short, terrified screams between 10:30 and 11. They even walked outside and stared into the darkness, hoping to find the source. They saw nothing and reported nothing. Debbie's brother waited at the rink while the crowds thinned at the high school, leaving her irritated parents waiting until midnight. When they realized that theirs was the only car left in the parking lot, they immediately called the police. Why did it take them so long to notice that your car didn't move from your spot? How big was that parking lot? The police were all too familiar with the recent disappearances in nearby towns. Later, a father told the police when he'd arrived late at the play, really, it's almost over, he saw a light-colored VW bug racing away from the school. A small handcuff key was found in the parking lot and fit the cuffs that Carol DeRange had brought in. Nothing else turned up, and Debbie Kent's family faced a tragic, heartbroken Christmas. In November, Meg, the girl that he's dating on and off, called King County Police a second time after she read that young women were now disappearing in towns surrounding Salt Lake because she knew Ted had this time, and Ted's name was added to their list of suspects, but no credible evidence linked him to the Utah crimes. In January 1975, Ted returned to Seattle after his finals and spent a week with Meg, who did not tell him that she had reported him to the police on 3 separate occasions, and she made plans to visit him in Salt Lake in August. No, girl, what are you doing? In 1975, Ted shifted much of his criminal activity eastward, from his base in Utah to Colorado. On January 12th, a 23-year-old registered nurse named Karen Elaine Campbell disappeared, walking down a well-lit hallway between the elevator and her room at the Wildwood Inn, which is weird. In Snowmass Village, 400 miles southeast of Salt Lake. She was a registered nurse from Farmington, Michigan, 5'4", long brown hair, engaged to a cardiologist 9 years older than her, and she got along well with his 2 children. They'd gone to Aspen to combine a medical seminar with a vacation. She hadn't been feeling well and had argued with her fiancé about their wedding date. She wanted to get married soon, but he was in no rush to have a second marriage. Though she didn't feel very well, Karen took the kids skiing and sightseeing while their father attended a seminar. Later, they ate dinner with friends and returned to the inn. They settled into the lounge, and Karen remembered a magazine she'd left in their room and went to get it. After she'd been gone a while, her fiancé went to find her. She wasn't in the room, and he couldn't find her anywhere. He searched frantically and soon called the police, but she had simply vanished into thin air. He had to pack and fly home with his kids, but kept waiting for a call from Karen, explaining why she walked away. Of course, she never called. On February 18th, she was found in a snowbank, not far from the inn where she'd been vacationing. She was nude, battered, and cut, and it was highly likely that she was sexually assaulted. On March 15th, 100 miles northeast of Snowmass, a ski instructor named Julie, age 26, disappeared while walking from her apartment to a dinner date with a friend. Julie was considered very attractive, a nice woman, and she worked in a sporting goods store, as well as being a ski instructor. She had a depressing history with men, often falling for the wrong type. The week she disappeared, she'd had the last heartbreak of her life. She thought that this guy was the one, and had gone to Sun Valley with him for the weekend, only to learn that he had no interest in a long-term relationship, which she wanted, and she was in the wrong atmosphere for finding a lasting relationship. She returned to Vail, and on March 15th talked to her mother for the last time on the phone. Then she decided she needed a break and left for the local tavern. She would have met her roommate there, but never arrived. Ted later told Colorado investigators that he approached her on crutches and asked her to help him carry his ski boots to his car, where he clubbed and handcuffed her, and then assaulted and strangled her at a secondary site. Weeks later, he made this 6-hour drive from Salt Lake to revisit her remains, which he'd like to do. Dennis Lynn Oliverson, age 25, disappeared near the Utah-Colorado border on April 6th. Pretty, dark hair. She had argued badly with her husband before she pedaled off on her bike to visit her parents. Her parents did not expect her, and when she didn't return home that night, her husband assumed that she was still angry and had stayed over. He decided to give her some time to cool off, and the next day, when he called their house, was alarmed to learn that she had never arrived. The police searched the route that she had most likely taken and found her bike and sandals under a viaduct. Next is Melanie Cooley, 18 years old. She disappeared on April 15th, 1975. hotel room before disposing of her body in a river. Now, in mid-May, 3 of Ted's Washington State DES workers, including Carol Ann Boone, visited him in Salt Lake and stayed for a week in his apartment. Ted subsequently spent a week in Seattle with Meg in early June, and they talked about getting married the following Christmas. Again, Meg made no mention of her multiple discussions with the police, and Ted disclosed neither his ongoing relationship with Carol Ann Boone or a concurrent romance with a Utah student. Oh, Lord, help me. Utah law student, known as various accounts as Kim Andrews or Sharon Hour. Pseudonyms, I tell you. On June 28th, Susan Curtis vanished from the campus of Brigham Young University, 45 miles south of Salt Lake. Her murder became his last confession, tape-recorded moments before he entered the execution chamber. The bodies of Wilcox, Kent, Cunningham, Oliverson, Culver, and Curtis were never recovered. Shelley Robertson disappeared July 1st from Golden, Colorado. She was given to hitchhiking for fun, and when she didn't show up for work on July 1st, her friends and family thought that she disappeared on a whim again. She'd argued with her boyfriend prior to her disappearance, and nobody really knew exactly what she was feeling. When summer passed without a word, they realized with dread that she had not gone away on her own. They learned that she had last been seen by friends on the 30th, and on July 1st, a policeman had noticed her at a gas station with a man in a beat-up old truck. On August 21st, her nude body was found inside a mine by 2 mining students. Cause of death was impossible to determine because of decomposition. In August or September of 1975, Ted Bundy was baptized into the Church of Latter-day Saints. Although he was not an active participant in services and ignored most church restrictions, he would later be excommunicated by the LDS Church following his 1976 kidnapping conviction, which we'll talk about later. When asked his religious preference after his arrest, he answered Methodist, the religion of his childhood. In Washington State, investigators were still struggling to analyze the Pacific Northwest murder spree that ended as abruptly as it had started. In an effort to make sense of the overwhelming mass of data, they resorted to then innovative strategy of compiling a database. They used the King County payroll computer, a huge primitive machine by contemporary standards, but the only one available. After inputting many lists that they had compiled, including classmates and acquaintances of each victim, Volkswagen owners named Ted, known sex offenders, and so on, they queried the computer for coincidences. Out of thousands of names, 26 turned up on 4 separate lists, and one of them was Ted Bundy. Detectives also manually compiled a list of 100 best suspects, and Ted was on that list as well. He was literally at the top of the pile of suspects when word came from Utah of his arrest. So, that's part 2, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.